pleasure of introducing our next panel, which is called Bridging the Divide, Innovative Models for Fair Compensation in the Restaurant Industry. And we have with us Joanna Woolmith, who is the manager at Juliet Restaurant in Somerville. We have Hayden Salvata, who's the managing director of May Street Kitchen here in Boston. And we have Keith Harmon, who is the owner of Casa Verde Tres Gatos and Center Street Cafe here in JP. They're going to talk to us about their innovative ways for ensuring fair and sustainable living wages for employees in the restaurant industry. So if you all want to give a brief introduction to both of you, your background, and the models that you're pursuing, that would be great. And then we can have a moderated discussion and open it up for Q&A. Joanna, the minister.
I was gonna just look right over there. Hi, Joanna. So let's see. First, I guess a little background on Juliet and the shortest background on me. So Juliet has been open for a little over a year, and we opened sort of specifically when the two owners were thinking about opening a restaurant. They wanted to do something that was very small scale to address what they saw as a lot of the challenges around employment sustainability in food service. And they both have, Josh and Katrina, who are the chef and general manager respectively, had backgrounds kind of in more traditional restaurant models, and we're looking to build something that was a bit different. And so if you've ever been to Juliet, you can see it's very, very small. It's a 30-seat cafe, restaurant, open breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which has given us a lot of flexibility to work outside of kind of the traditional model, and focus on both what we feel is a fair compensation and staff advancement, employee training. Should I just do intro now? Yeah, and so do it all? Oh, okay. Yeah, and so I came on right after Juliet opened. It was actually my first management and front of house role, so front of house versus back of house. I had been back of house before, cooking and baking at other restaurants, and was interested in some more of the front of house customer service and management experience. So I came on there and was really attracted to the mission that the owners of Juliet outlined. So most importantly, sort of everything we're working toward is making restaurant careers a viable career choice for as many people as possible, rather than kind of a sort of side job or a temporary job while people figure out other things. The industry generally, has super high turnover. People tend to cycle in and out. Generally, compensation outside of fine dining service roles. So you're, waiter, sommelier, those types of people that are making big tip money, is generally very low paying. And so they wanted to try to create a fine dining restaurant that could really lead from the top in terms of addressing some of the ills that they saw in the industry. So kind of the biggest thing that we have chosen to do is have an alternate compensation model, so trying to create sustainable wage practices. And what that means for us is that we don't have any tipped employees. So as I think the keynote speaker this morning from Rock spoke probably a lot about, generally in restaurants you've tipped and untipped employees, which creates a big wage gap in fine dining. And so we could have opened using that model, but decided not to. And so we have a single wage scale for all of our employees, cooks to dishwashers to our servers, and then have a profit sharing model. So the idea of that is that we can provide both higher wages for the back of house employees to sort of try to shrink that gap, and then also provide economic stability for all of our employees, rather than having, with tipped employees on a good night, you take home a good chunk of change. Saturday night, you do really well, but then on a slow shift, you're making much, much less. And so in order to sort of focus on remedying some of those kind of big issues, we decided to use profit sharing. And not, and use that as a long-term incentive. So our profit sharing happens quarterly rather than a tip that you receive at the end of a night. We're incentivizing longer-term careers and longer-term sort of working with us and rewarding that. The other main thing that we do is open book management, which means that we share our financial information with all of our employees. And we, in fact, had a series of classes. They were weekly. Now they've kind of slowed down to educate all of our employees about reading our financial statements, our profit and loss statements, and helping them to really understand what the restaurant's sort of profit and loss looks like, what our costs look like, and that has really allowed us to bring employees in on controlling those costs. And then, being able to be very transparent about profit sharing and the amount of money that we're all going to be able to take home if we're able to impact those numbers ourselves, which both helps us and has made us now profitable after our first year, but also we hope is a good learning opportunity for employees that, especially outside of managers in restaurants, don't generally have that sort of window into business operations. So those are kind of the main things. One of the common questions that we get with deciding to go tipless is that are we able to attract sort of servers who generally, career servers, especially in fine dining, are looking for a larger paycheck. And because of our very small size, we've been able to attract kind of more non-traditional restaurant employees who are looking to have experience in different parts of the restaurants, and because we don't have that tipped and non-tipped distinction, we're able to have flexible roles. So, I myself on any given day might be making croissants in the kitchen because I manage our pastry program, or out on the floor, as a front of house manager serving guests. And we have the same thing for our hourly employees. We have a number of flexible roles so that people can kind of think about what skills they want to learn and what role they might want to play in their career overall. So it's kind of an overview from us.
That was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to be brief. Mainly, I'm just a very big fan of Keith's, and I like to hear him speak, and I want time for that.
There we go.
But also because Joanna just described almost the exact same program that Maymay is in the process of implementing. We're not tipless, but we are doing open book management and profit sharing, and she's considerably farther into the program and could do a better job describing it. What I can do is tell the story of a restaurant who's been around for about 5 years and started out without thinking about labor or any kind of new model for compensation. That's because we did not. The business was started in 2012 by 3 siblings from Brookline, and they had very strict guidelines for sourcing, but really no other structure. This was the second year of the City of Boston's food program, so I think of it as frontier days. Anything went. The menu changed every day, and it was really just based on what you could get into Boston at that time from local farms, which was much harder than it is now, just 5 years later. So I think you guys are familiar with that kind of story. It meant a lot of underutilized cuts of meat, like Trotters, and then the brand that kind of surrounds that kind of scrappy food forward business, which was the right time. 2012, 2013 is when David Chang is becoming a household name, and food trucks are on the up and up. So the brand itself experienced a fair amount of success. The following year, a brick and mortar restaurant was opened in BU's East Campus. Then after that, a shipping container location out in the Seaport. And we experimented with a retail line of bottled sauces, which are still going, and just recently got a deal for a cookbook. So all those things are happening, and the truck is still out on the road. It's going to start its 5th season next week. And all throughout this, the social mission maintains itself. It's pretty clear and straightforward. We want to support local agricultural small business, and over time that shifts from direct relationships to farmers to encouraging food hubs that can provide year-round refrigeration and just more constant revenue. And that's, as we grow in volume as well, we're no longer able to maintain those individual relationships and are thinking about the larger network and the larger structure. Except we hit like year 4 and 5, and this is at a time when like nationally more focus is being placed on labor. ROC's campaign for one fair wage is on our minds, and like cities like San Francisco and Seattle are doing a $15 minimum wage for fast food workers. It's just much more present. And that combines with the fact that after 5 years of having a successful and socially driven business, we accumulated a staff, a really committed, like persistent staff that stuck around for many, many years. So to give you some sense, I joined Maymay the year after the truck opened, and I'm not even the longest tenured employee. So there are people who stick around for many, many years. And that really makes the question of compensation a lot more pressing when you have low turnover like that. Like if you're a high turnover business and you have no problem being a high turnover business, you don't have to address your compensation model because it's working for what it's working. Like you're getting your employees in, they leave, it doesn't matter, you have low turnover. But when you have a tenured staff that's been around for a while, then you really need to start reevaluating compensation models. Something that we played around with was going tipless. We ran into a bunch of challenges just because we're a pretty diversified small business. So not only do we have a more fine dining dinner service where we take in about 20% of revenue in tips, but we also have a food truck which does almost no business in tips, and catering, which does variable amounts of tips. And if you're in the process of switching from a tipped restaurant to a tipless restaurant, you need to be able to capture all that revenue and then redistribute it in a way that makes sense. And when you have these different pockets of labor that are compensated differently, it's a lot more difficult to institute any kind of standard wage structure across all jobs, or even pay for a program when you're not getting that much income from tips. So that really led us down the road of profit sharing. It also was very helpful because we had accumulated over years a bunch of different kind of merit-based bonus structures that were diverse and confusing, and embracing the idea of profit sharing along with open book management allowed us to have a very transparent one-size-fits-all policy for all staff. And it really just meant going over to Juliet and talking to Josh and Katrina and being like, wow, what are you guys doing? It seems to work really well. And they recommended a consulting group called Rethink that is just developing this program and hoping to roll it out to a bunch of different restaurants over the next couple of years. So that's it.
My name is Keith Harmon. My business partners, David Doyle and Sally Perez Olares. We started Tres Gatos in 2011, and since then have opened Center Street Cafe in 2014, and most recently Casa Verde last year. So they're all in Jamaica Plain. They're all really close to each other. Right from the beginning, we were deeply concerned with the traditional divide between front of house and back of house. And if you look at restaurants, like our main product is really an emotional feeling, an emotional experience. And if there isn't good positivity and alignment between the front of house, which is mostly tipped employees, and the back of house, which are cooks and dishwashers and prep cooks and chefs and non-tipped employees traditionally and legally. Most restaurants historically experience a divide between those two groups, and a big part of the divide comes from the wage gap. So the wage gap has been an ongoing issue for at least 8 or 10 years, and I'm going to quickly give you a kind of a background of where it comes from. But we had come up with this hospitality administrative fee solution in late 2014 as something we thought that would work, and we were frankly a little bit afraid to roll it out because it was very different. And then in October of 2015, Danny Myers, who's probably the country's best known restaurateur, came out and said that I'm switching my restaurants to hospitality included. I'm eliminating tipping, and I want to use that to eliminate or reduce the gap between front of house tipped employees and back of house non-tipped employees. So at that point in the neighborhood, I mean, all of a sudden this sort of owner industry chat room concept, was all of a sudden on the front page of the New York Times, and everyone's talking about it. And in our very progressive neighborhood, Jamaica Plain, everyone's feeling the burn big time, which is still a tragedy. But so, in a hurry, we were like, this is our chance, So December 1st, 2015, we're going to roll out these administrative fees. So the structure of the hospitality administration fees is that, for everyone who comes into the restaurant, we add 3% on to their bill, and then we collect that administrative fee and we distribute it exclusively to back of house non-tipped employees according to total hours worked. So now I'm going to shift gears and go back a little bit and explain the source of the wage gap and sort of where it comes from and why. I mean, I'm an accountant I worked in restaurants for 30 years, but I've been doing financial accounting and management as a consultant for about 10 years, and so much like a man with a hammer, this problem looks like an accounting nail to me. So if you go back to the late 80s, which is sadly when I started working in restaurants, my father literally drove me to a restaurant on my 13th birthday, and I bussed tables that day. It used to be that there was always this divide, but servers would maybe make $120 in tips on a Friday night, and the line cooks would maybe make $70 or $75. And so the tips people made more, but it wasn't a major divide. So if you just think of that ratio back in time as maybe 1.5 to 1, the ratio of tipped to non-tipped employees, what happens over time is every time there's any inflation in the expense structure for a restaurant, whether that's the cost of food going up, or latex gloves, or rent goes up, or insurances goes up, insurance goes up, we have to raise our frontline prices to offset that cost and keep our bottom line stable. What's interesting, what happens when we do that is every time we raise prices, we elicit a raise to the servers from the guests, because people, as much as they think individually they're controlling their experience via tipping, when taken in large numbers, they statistically tip identically in a given restaurant over time. So over time, what's happening is that restaurants are slowly raising, so the gap's like this, and restaurants are slowly raising their prices to offset rent increases, insurance is going up, latex gloves, and the servers get a raise from the guests every time that happens. And here's back of house, because we're just offsetting our costs, so back of house non-tipped people are making the same money. So it runs like a slope like this for a while, and then either because we feel bad or because there's market pressure, we say, okay, we need to pay back of house better, so we're going to raise our prices to give everyone back of house a raise. So we do that, and back of house comes up, but right when we do that, front of house also goes up, right? Because they, again, are tied to the top line price. And so over time, you get this sort of slope from regular inflation, and then you get a stair step for both, and then a slope, and then a stair step for both, and then a slope. And you can see how over time, with tipped employees tracking to top line revenue and non-tipped employees living with the result of bottom line results, what was a maybe 1.5 to 1 wage gap in the late 80s has expanded in many restaurants to 2.5, 2.8, 3.0 to 1. And in Danny's first announcement, he talks about the fact that in terms of real dollars, front of house tipped employees have seen their wages go up by 200% in the last 30 years, but kitchen non-tipped employees have seen their wages, their real wages adjusted, go up by only 25%. And so we're sort of living with the historical fallout of a system that worked in the distant past. and doesn't work at all anymore. And if you can think of the friction between, David and I, think of it as one group of people taking care of another group of people, and we're in our restaurants every day and we're working with them, and to know that your front of house tipped employees are working really hard and making $31, $32, $33 an hour in total compensation, although a small amount of that comes from us. And in our case, our back of house average employee was making just south of $15 an hour. But everyone's working hard, and yet the tipped people are making 2.2 to 2.4 times as much as the non-tipped people. So literally one night I realized, because I do the accounting for our restaurants, that I realized that our kitchen payroll expressed as a percentage of our revenue is about 18 to 20%, depending. And if I could take 3% and have people not tip on it, collect it, and hardwire it directly to their compensation, I could raise their average compensation by 18 to 20%. So that's what we did. We tacked on an extra 3% hospitality administration fee. We announced it because we thought it was really important for it to not be a line item or something we're like trying to get away with. And basically it's been highly, highly effective. And so we just released the year one results of the first year, and the back of house, front of house is making about the same as they were before. I think they're up by like 1%, but back of house is making $2.87 an hour more than they were before this program. So what I like about the solution is that it closes the wage gap on a one-time basis. So now that ratio is back down to about 1.7, 1.8 to 1, where it was at about 2.5 to 1 in our restaurants. But there's another really important factor, is that every time we raise prices in the future, this 3% will now tether to those new prices. And every time we have busy months in the future, the back of house employees see the same benefit of a busier sales period as the front of house employees do as well. So we have more shared vision. It's been a complete game changer in terms of, we always had, I think, a really good culture, but now everyone's aligned to the same goal, which is to really increase revenue on a regular basis over time. Also, because and this gets into dorky accounting stuff for you and me, but basically because the fees are collected according to total sales and distributed according to total hours, two things happen. The line cook gets the same hourly share as the dishwasher. So to that dishwasher who for us comes into the company at $12 an hour, that $2.87 an hour makes a much bigger percentage difference, but it still benefits everyone across the board. What we didn't see coming, that's become a really interesting ancillary unintended consequence, is that when you start collecting according to revenue and distributing according to total hours, it becomes a backdoor efficiency metric in sales revenue per hour worked. So servers have their own naturally beneficial system of figuring out, like, how do we have the biggest sales night with the least amount of hours in the pool. And now on a slightly bigger spectrum, the kitchen teams have that same philosophy. And I've had many line cooks and dishwashers say something along the lines of, it's not great to get sent home on a Tuesday night because it's snowing and it's a slow night, but I know when I do that, I'm going to make the fees more efficient, and it's going to be better for me and everyone who works back of house with me in the long run in terms of that pool. So we've had a tremendous amount of success with it. It's the single best business decision we've ever made. And I'm a serious, this is my baby, so of course I think it's a great program, but what I'm realizing over time is that it was really good for us because of the particular compensation ratios. But I actually think that a non-tip solution in some businesses, especially the ones that are just getting started, is brilliant and is probably the way forward for the industry in the long run. I also, at this point, it's interesting, we've had about 12 restaurants adopt hospitality admin fees in the last 3 months or so. But for instance, Mama Lay's and State Park and Kendall Square did something different where they did below the line revenue sharing, where they take 5% of their food sales and they distribute that into a pool for their back of house people. And so what I'm realizing is that the three of us and other people that are pushing the model forward, and this is happening all across the country, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and what we're all doing on our own and together is developing a toolkit to bring small neighborhood restaurants into the future. And then I want to go through a quick presentation on why I think small restaurants are so important. I think the model itself is broken based on these historical compensation systems that we've adopted going back a long time. And I'm going to talk about the numbers for our restaurant, but I think it's true for many other restaurants. So I'm going to put everything in terms of sales dollars. I'm going to mix some balance sheet and P&L terms together. But there's a special thing about small businesses in general, small restaurants in particular, where we're highly, highly inefficient. But like hoses with small little points in them, we tend to fertilize the area around us. So I think most city planners and people who live in neighborhoods would agree that restaurants can be great anchors for business communities. It creates traffic, it creates social gathering places, and I think in a more and more digital world, people crave that interaction and ability to be together socially. There's also a safety component where when you have restaurants that are operating until 11 or 12 o'clock at night, certainly anyone who lived in JP over the last 20 years would tell you that with more restaurants, it's a safer neighborhood and more things can happen, families feel more comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. But for every sales dollar in the restaurant, there's about 52 or 54 cents that goes to compensation for the employees, and about 28 to 32% comes from us as the owners of the business, and about 20 to 22% comes from guests in the form of tipping their servers. 27 to 30 cents goes to vendors, and we have a tendency to work with other local vendors and emphasize local agriculture more than big box chain restaurants would do. About 25 cents on the dollar goes into what I call the general and administrative bucket, which is insurances and latex gloves and all the administrative pieces that comes along. Again, we work with other local businesses that are then paying their own local employees. I want to say about 12 cents on the dollar goes to taxes to fund government programs like Social Security and Medicare and local and national unemployment programs. And David, Mari, and I are very progressive people. We think the tax base is really important and that the government should look after those who can't and have a safety net. Another 12 cents on every dollar goes to federal and local income taxes. 7 cents on the dollar goes to the Department of Revenue via meals tax. For us, 2 cents on every dollar goes to supporting local organizations and charities. So for every sales dollar, it's actually about $1.49 that gets pumped through the local economy. And we as owners, although our margins tend to be 5 to 7%, and especially in the first 5 to 6 years of the business, most of those margins pay down debt. We also live in the local area. And so, I think small independent restaurants are really critical to social life in neighborhoods and quality of life where people live. And I know for a fact that if there aren't systemic changes to compensation and also some areas in the food system, and I have to really applaud May for all the work they've done in terms of promoting and actually figuring out the mechanics by which local agriculture can benefit. There's a lot of good reasons for small independent restaurants to exist, and I think our three organizations are trying to do a lot of work to help bring the model into the future, because otherwise it's like Cheesecake Factory everywhere. Not that that's not fine, but it's not really fine, so. So that's my thing, sorry.
So thanks to all of you. I have another question now, thinking, sort of synthesizing what you've been saying and thinking about this as a movement forward. So for Joanna, how has this been, given that it's been your first year and it being something that you've concentrated on from the get-go? And then for Keith and Kaden, how has it been transitioning into this? And how would you see that impacting the future of the restaurant world?
Yeah, so definitely, as Keith touched on, like starting as a new business with a no tipping model from the get-go made it a lot easier. Restaurants that have tried to transition or have transitioned definitely face challenges, including retention issues with servers because they can't make up that lost wage from taking the tip away and redistributing it, basically. And so in the first year, I mean, the things that sort of I guess the biggest wins for us have been definitely staff engagement with our model, which has fed into retention. So, you know, restaurants high turnover, and over the course of the year, we've been able to bring on people that really cared about our mission, that had either worked in the industry for a while and had seen a lot of the challenges and felt those challenges themselves. And so we're drawn in, as well as career changers who were looking for opportunities and wanted to be able to kind of work in different parts of the business. So that's definitely been really great. Figuring it out in the first year, you know, some of the challenges have definitely been around not having a model to follow, not having benchmarks in terms of our costs. So I'm not going to give an accounting class, and I certainly am not the most qualified to do so on this panel. But for us, when you look at our costs, because all the compensation comes from the business, it's all payroll. There's not this other tipped money that is not fed into the main revenue that we're paying from. So when we look at our costs, labor is a much higher percentage than sort of the standard restaurant, and that means that the business needs to pay all the employees their total compensation. So that has definitely put pressure on us, because in the traditional model, on a slow day, your servers are just going to make less money. Maybe you're going to cut people. You're going to control that. The risk is sort of transferred to the employees. And because we've felt it was really important to guarantee our employees the level of compensation we were able to at this point, pre-profit sharing. So in our first year, we were really focused on breaking even and getting to the place where we could start doing profit sharing, and now we're there. So we would have liked to pay everyone more, but that wasn't realistic from the get-go, but we felt it was important that they could depend on a really consistent wage from us. So that put, you know, pressure on the business to be able to make that payroll every couple weeks, but we were able to. I think those are like those have been the biggest challenges, and we've been really excited that we have been able to make it work and been able to, you know, retain and train the servers that we have now so that we can make no tipping work and not need to feel like we needed to sort of incentivize to be more appealing in the labor market. I'd say the other big win for us that has actually made our costs much more efficient, because we share that our financial information and have really focused on that in employee training, looking at how can we be more efficient, and that, you know, means less food waste, but it also just means overall making our labor hours more efficient with the way we prepare for breakfast and lunch versus dinner. And that's actually been a really, really big driver of our success in the first year, that we've been able to really keep costs even lower than we had initially thought. And now we have a benchmark that is better than we thought it would be.
Also, Boston's best omelet. which is not easy to make, just for the record.
3 meals a day, you can have an omelet at Juliet.
I can talk to a challenge we faced when we were considering going tipless in 2014 that ultimately we did not overcome, and then maybe the challenges that we overcame in moving towards profit sharing. And I alluded to this earlier, and it's just when you have multiple different business models within one company, you don't necessarily have the ability to recapture tips revenue and distribute it. So in our case, that meant we had a specific target, which was Boston minimum living wage according to MIT, that we wanted to get everyone on staff, including servers, to as a baseline, and we would do that by refusing to take tips at dinner and upping our prices and using that revenue to increase everyone's base salary. That works at our restaurant. It does not work on the truck where there is no tips revenue. And the truck already operates in a pretty price-sensitive environment. It's vending alongside 7, 8 other trucks at any given time, and because of the way that we do sourcing, we're already at a higher price point than anyone else in that field. So it would have really shot us way out of the reasonable range in order to be able to do that on the truck. And that was a really tough position because we were considering implementing a living wage in only part of a company, and that's not a comfortable thing that you would ever be able to really justify to your staff, and ultimately led us away from going completely tip-free. Although I think everyone in the industry is not happy about the state of accepting tips if you do accept tips. It's something that we would love to get rid of at some point. In terms of implementing profit sharing, the hardest thing for us was all of these pre-existing compensation models that have been developed over time. And opening that up to transparency is pretty hard when you have individual negotiated compensation packages across a management team and across employees. And that's just because, with any workplace where you don't have real formal salary increase requests or schedules, you just have particular class of employees who are more likely to ask and more likely to get raises, and that creates kind of a systemic inequality. So if you're moving over to a system that is completely transparent, you have to unearth all of that and basically, rescind a lot of things that have previously been offered and negotiate. So that was a process for us.
So for us, in terms of the transition, we just we announced it on November 30th and decided it on December 1st. Although we had a series of meetings with our teams leading up to that. It's interesting, the administrative fees in general, on the internet, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I'll do the good news first. Since we started the fees, we've had maybe 150 to 160,000 guests, and 15 to 18 complaints and negative comments, none of which were severe. We certainly get the occasional yuppie tax comment on Yelp, which is always fun. Early on, it was interesting because, the internet, man, it's just, things these guys are Comcast, and I was like, who walks by Tres Gatos and thinks it's Comcast? It's 49 seats, it's tiny, and greedy owners and all this stuff. So it was a little bit scary online, and quickly we realized that those just weren't our people. That if we were going to lose people for 3 cents on the dollar, we were probably going to lose them anyway. And then as time went by and no one talked about it, and we heard a vast preponderance of this is amazing, we realized one of the other great reasons to keep small restaurants sustainable is that so many people, either their first job or their college job or after college or to this day, they've worked in the restaurant industry. And can I ask quickly how many people have worked in restaurants here? And then out of the people who have worked in restaurants, were any of you not aware of the wage gap between servers and people who work in the kitchen? Oh, okay. So I think that's the vast majority of our guests and the vast majority of the American public, I think they've worked in restaurants, and most of them are aware that it's a little unfair that you have 2 groups of people that both work hard and one group of people makes substantially more than the other. And so I think if anything, it, again, our product is emotional. I think it created more attachment. And in the industry in particular, there was a lot of positive support. And, you know, when you have people in the industry that you have a lot of respect for that are supporting you and saying nice things, that means a lot. So, you know, but in the beginning, David and I were like on these chat boards daily, like, why don't you just raise prices? We did raise prices, blah, 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 blah. Well, that doesn't fix the wage gap, blah, 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 blah. So that was pretty harrowing and terrifying, and we were sort of willing to move backwards. But then, you know, I think in the first month we had like 2 complaints, and that first month was, I think, 60,000 guests or something. Not 60,000, I'm sorry, like 20,000 guests. So pretty quickly we realized it wasn't a thing. So we kind of just forgot about it. And then this blogger, Patrick McGuire, did a post in December of 2016 that kind of got the results out. And then since then we've had Puritan Inn Company, Bar Mazzana, Tavern Road, Tiger Mama, Commonwealth Kitchen, Sweet Cheeks, and 3 or 4 other restaurants come out and do admin fees, whether it's called kitchen appreciation or quality of life fee or whatever. So yeah, now it's turning into a whole thing. There's like 15 or 16 restaurants in Boston doing it. So
Awesome. Well, it's been really exciting to hear the different successes you've had and also the challenges. I'm wondering if this has had any impact on the relationship between the front of house staff and the back of house staff at all.
Should I start? Yeah, so for us, because I guess I can speak a little bit kind of about my experience prior to Juliet, because with Juliet, so we opened with this model. We never had tipped and untipped employees. We always had a single compensation scale that we use for all employees, which has meant that people like me, but also some of our more junior staff who are interested in both serving and maybe doing some prep, learning some things in the kitchen, are able to do so, and there's not this tension between, when are you on the clock getting tipped and when are you not. So it gives us certainly flexibility in that way. And in my previous experience as a back of house employee, so I've never actually personally worked for tips because I've always worked in the kitchen, and I think I can think of quite a few times I've been surprised actually in talking to front of house, and actually when we have compensation conversations, to find out that they actually don't realize how big the gap is. I think in real numbers for like the coworkers they see every day. I've been really lucky and feel like I had good relationships in the restaurants I've worked in. It's been a positive work environment. And so I cared about them and they cared about me. But when it came down to the numbers, they were generally kind of surprised that I and other back of house employees made so little. And I can think of, I guess, only one time in particular, and it was around when Danny Meyer started making news with going hospitality included for his whole restaurant group. We're starting to transition to that. And I was working in a fine dining restaurant as a cook at the time, and there were a lot of rumblings about whether we were going to do that. And the general manager was going down to New York to go to one of his meetings to talk about how they were doing it and how it was going to work, and trying to get other restaurants on board. And the servers were pretty openly hostile about that, and I was really surprised. I understand, of course, when you feel like something's being taken away from you, you're not going to like it. I wouldn't like it either, I'm sure, but I was really surprised that they were comfortable expressing that to me and other kitchen workers, because for me, I was like, how don't you understand? How don't you know how much you're making and how much we're making, and how that's a problem? And the reality is, we're all talking about fine dining, right? We're talking about the very small part of the industry where tipped employees are making significant income. And the reality is, for most of food service workers, none of them are making really great money, even front of house. When you think about chain restaurants like a Chili's or an Applebee's, most of those people service staff who are tipped employees are working, for right around the minimum wage. It's not as if like all servers across the board are doing really well, which is a lot of the reason at Juliet we felt like we had this opportunity to kind of lead from the top and and develop this new model, knowing that we would be able to bring in the revenue to hopefully sustain it.
You passing? Yeah, I think, that's a really great observation, is that there's different labor markets out there, and it depends what, we consider ourselves in casual, upscale casual, but we're definitely in the more cosmopolitan side of restaurants. So, my background is really service-based and a long time bartending. But certainly there's this perception that, no one wants to talk about it, and I think, I feel bad saying this, but for servers that are making $30 to $35 an hour, once you start talking about like making everyone make more together and they're like completely offended, like how dare you, it's like, well, you kind of just carry stuff that other people make and put in 12-hour shifts to, and I have a lot of respect for servers. I was a server myself. What ended up being a really positive side effect of this program is we actually had a lot of servers come to us and say, well, thank God, because we've known for a long time that they make a lot less than we do. We don't really want to make less, so thank you for doing another program that allows them to make more without taking money out of our pockets. And there's so much talk about undoing tipping that a lot of tipped professionals are really worried about it, and so to have a solution that doesn't sort of threaten their sense of their job is good. I also, I think it's good to try and fix the problem to begin with in a way that doesn't take money out of servers' pockets. And I think part of the other problem with the tipped model, the way it's evolved, is that, and hopefully discussions like this and across the country, we need to evolve past the tipping system and make it so that everyone can make more money. We need for guests to start to be educated enough that they see a non-tipping restaurant, they're able to understand that $15 burger is equivalent to an $11 burger at a traditional restaurant, and that's, but it's a really dearly held institution. I don't think it's a good thing, but we, like many restaurants, have our list of stakeholders, and ours mirrors Danny Meyer's. So, for us, the staff is first, and 50% of our staff are tipped employees, so we have to be really mindful of looking after them and not sort of disregarding their interests and their feelings. And number two is absolutely the guest. And even though tipped employees don't like the idea of getting away from tipping, for the most part, and hopefully this will change over time, guests themselves, they really don't like the idea of it. And it's this really misguided notion that somehow they're controlling the experience by withholding this tips. But again, it's just not true. They tip the same on average in large numbers. It just doesn't, and as a matter of fact, there's some really non-pleasant sociological factors that that have to do with how people tip. Like, people in general will tip men better than women, and they'll tip white people better than people of color. And it's not a great institution. However, it's still, like many other not great institutions, they're still really held on to by the dining public. And so hopefully within 5 to 10 to 15 years, there's enough knowledge and information out there that we can start kind of bringing the whole industry into the future. And that's why personally, when I see Juliet launching like this, I think, first of all, the food and service are exceptional, so anyone who says that you're going to get worse service by eliminating tipping is just flat out wrong. And they're bringing this message to the dining public that, the models themselves have to change if you want this gorgeous little cafe by day, fine dining concept at night, if you want this amazing family business that emphasizes local agriculture, which is hands down better for the planet long run, if you want those types of small independent restaurants to survive, we need to start thinking about, different pricing models from their point of view and different compensation models from our point of view. So it's all good.
Thank you so much. So I want to open it up for questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and then I'll ask that you actually use your mic, so that what I'm doing, so you press on the push button here so that everyone can hear you. So does anyone have any questions?
Perfect.
If not, I have a few more, but yeah.
Thank you all. I was wondering how you talk about, in your restaurants maybe, or in other ones that you know, using more expensive products and emphasizing local agriculture, which obviously could lead to a price increase, and then also on the compensation end of things, making actions that also could lead to a price increase, and then thinking about accessibility of restaurant food and costs there, or prices there, I suppose.
Well, I'm going to jump in and just say that the 3% price increase is the cost of dining. Cost of dining needs to get more expensive for many reasons. Part of which is compensation, a lot more of which is ethical and responsible and sustainable sourcing. And I think the cost of food needs to get more expensive because you have big agriculture that, again, I'm the accounting person, but mass agriculture is creating this huge liability in the future in the sense that these soils will not be sustainable for nearly as long or productive for nearly as long as they would have been otherwise. And so that cost needs to be fully built into not only commodity level food, but certainly dining as well. And as far as how we justify it and talk about it, it's about the value proposition. So if someone just makes you an omelet and puts it down and here you go, and there's no talk about it and there's no marketing about it, then you do that omelet sort of a disservice because, I know Juliet, for instance, is using, free-range organic eggs, and there's a lot of work and care that goes into putting that onto the plate, and they're also paying their people really well. And so it's our job as restaurant people, and with the servers especially being the front line of it, to really explain why a ribeye in our restaurant is $35 and it's $18 at the Outback. Not that you should have to explain that, but apparently you do. So I think you got to talk about, you have to talk about some of the economic realities in a way that are palatable. You got to talk about the sourcing. You got to talk about the level of care. You got to talk about the fact that you do in-house butchering. You've got to talk about that you make all the bread and pastries and everything in-house, and you really got to build that value proposition, which you always did anyway, but it's more important now than ever, because I think problems with the food supply are going to be, that and class imbalances are going to be the most devastating issues facing humanity now and for at least the next 100 years. And so things have to get more expensive, unfortunately. And you got to do a good job of describing why that needs to happen. That's my answer.
Yeah, I feel like it's especially challenging when you're looking at fast casual and there's not really there's no server, there's no time to have that conversation, and if you're turning over like one customer every 45 seconds, there's only so much like marketing information that they can really take in. So in the case of the food truck, we really just have to make like the value there, which is just like getting creative. So that's if someone shows up, comes off bus from New York in South Station, comes up to the truck, walks away, doesn't know anything about us, and isn't like insulted that they just spent $10 for what's in their plate, because that's something that we're in very real danger of happening all the time. So we can't. That is the right way to do it, but we can't do that all the time.
You guys also do such a great job with your brand awareness and whatnot, though. The messaging's out there for the food community that you're doing a tremendous amount of work to support local agriculture. So.
Yeah, if you're tapped in, like if you're following us on Twitter or whatever, like then you'll have some sense.
Follow May on Twitter. I'm telling you, it's important.
At May Boston. But yeah, it's a challenge, and it's also a challenge of just like overwhelming people, because I know you can walk into a Sweetgreen and you'll get the same exact spiel as you'll get if you walk into May, and it's hard to really differentiate like which one's doing a better job.
I just want to say that we actually got called out versus Burger King. Like someone was like, I don't understand why I can go into Burger King and for $2.95 get a double burger and an order of french fries and they're nice to me. Where's the outcry for businesses like that on Center Street? I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, so we live in danger of feedback like that.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have similar challenges, particularly at breakfast and lunch. That's definitely where we feel sort of the pressure on customers seeing our menu prices and having that like initial like, ooh, that's more than I think it should be, which definitely part of the problem is people think food should be cheaper than it should be, in our opinion, because we do want to source high quality ingredients. We want to support local agriculture. For us, because Juliet is so small and the kitchen is the center of the restaurant and everyone can see everything that's happening all the time, when we bring in a whole pig to butcher, like everyone who's there sees that. So that's kind of a fun part of it. You can see that, you know, we are making everything from scratch, from ingredients that hopefully, you know, even if you're not a food professional, look, you know, alive, and they're not prepackaged, and we're, you know, making everything from scratch, which I think when you go to a cafe, there's definitely a demographic of customers who's not necessarily expecting that. And over the past year, we've definitely had to adjust our menu pricing strategy because of that, particularly dinner at this point kind of subsidizes breakfast and lunch, because that's when we have the most price conscious customers. And we do also prioritize, you know, being accessible and being a neighborhood restaurant for the Union Square community. So we're very conscious of having a mix of menu prices or items at various price points on our menu all the time, and keeping, like, especially our coffee, like we want to have like our $2 small coffee. We don't want to have to bring that price up, even though the margins on that are basically none. We just think it's important to have. And we actually, one of the changes we made in addition to trying to control costs for breakfast and lunch by using the dinner, whatever's on the dinner menu, to drive our menu offerings for breakfast and lunch, which makes us more efficient both in terms of prep, so labor, and ingredients. We actually had initially started off by having our prices also include tax, so that they were like nice round numbers, which we thought was good. We have since stopped doing that, probably in the last 6 months, which is a small change. I mean, it's a small percentage, but it does make a difference to people, it seems, and they don't have a problem paying the tax. They're not surprised when it ends up being, you know, $1 or $2 more, whatever. But yeah, we felt like having sort of the service be included, and then having the tax in, like, that was something we could live without, given that our prices do include service and people try to tip us like fairly frequently. And so I'm always, you know, ready to be like, oh, our prices include service, like, don't worry. And then often we get the like, oh, so European response, which, sure, great.
I think
Sometimes they want to have a conversation about like why, or sometimes they know, you know, they're like, oh, that's great, that's like good. Are they paying you enough? Is a question I get sometimes. But more often than not, they're just like, all right, there's no tip line, I don't have to worry.
I also want to clarify a little bit and just say that I don't want food to go up so that we can charge more for it, or so that things multiply. I just think that, and I have no problem with Burger King per se, I just think that many people aren't pricing in that to get to that really low-priced fast food commodity, it's built on really inhumane and non-sustainable animal welfare. It's built on below minimum wage farm labor structures. It's built on practices that are really bad for the environment, short and long term, that take future life and usefulness out of the soil. So, you know, I think it's in humanity's interest for food to be as inexpensive as possible, while at the same time also keeping it sustainable, so that 2, 4, 6, 8,000 years from now, the planet can actually still provide food. So I'm not in favor, I don't want food prices to go up just to go up. I just think there's a lot of irresponsible business practices that are in play that are keeping the price of food artificially low. And Burger King's fine.
Thank you. I have a question mostly for Keith. As an urban planner, I really love your point about restaurants as cornerstones of the neighborhood, but of course you're in Jamaica Plain, which is a complicated neighborhood. So as you talk about, leading the industry in terms of pricing, how do you make sure that you're not moving too fast for your neighborhood, or pushing a change that pushes people out? And then also for Joanna, kind of this question about, fine dining being a very small section of the industry. How do you see these changes affecting other sectors of the restaurant industry?
We each have our own questions, so I'm happy to go first if you'd like.
Go first while I Google the answer.
Okay, sounds good. You got some numbers, I'm sure. So the question for us, or me, about how our model could impact the rest of the industry. So I think first of all, we wanted to try to find a model that worked within sort of what our mission, and wanted to see if it worked, because the reality was, there's no other restaurant that is exactly like Juliet, that has a business model, or opened with that model. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on restaurants, especially in their first year. So we really pushed it from the get-go. And I think that there's definitely making it work, and hopefully proving that these values can be embedded in the business and we can still turn a profit and attract employees. I mean, we're a business, we're not a charity, and can make that work is definitely significant. I think there's also an education piece. I mean, every person who comes to Juliet or hears about Juliet probably has a sense that there's something different about it, and maybe I get to have a conversation about them about why our compensation looks different, or maybe they have read interviews with our owners about that. I mean, we try to be really active, especially with Rock, with like the report that they, I think, talked about earlier that we were interviewed for, very supportive of that and kind of local issues. I mean, I wouldn't say, like, we're not a fast casual restaurant. We're not trying to create a scalable business model. We're a small independent restaurant. Hopefully Josh and Katrina can open more restaurants in the future and adapt the model and make it work on a slightly larger scale. But yeah, there are a lot of challenges in the industry that we're just kind of trying to solve in our one little place.
I can't say enough good things about either Juliet or May. I think they're serious leaders in lots of ways. As far as the neighborhood development thing, I would say that we, in our businesses, Tres Gatos, and then the cafe, and then Casa Verde, we've benefited a lot from restaurants that came before us, and those restaurants being there, again, I think there's a nebular series of businesses that start to create a commercial center in a neighborhood, and we've been the beneficiary of what came before us in that neighborhood. In terms of neighborhood planning in general, I think there's two major impediments to that happening, and I want to give really, I don't know if this is public or not, but I think Ayanna Presley and Tito Jackson did some really amazing work when they freed up, when they created a larger pool of non-transferable, non-asset-based beer and wine licenses and liquor licenses, because that's a major flaw in the Boston food industry. And so when you have, I don't know if you know this, but there's this finite amount of transferable beer and wine and full alcohol licenses in Boston. And currently a beer and wine license goes for about $110,000, and a full alcohol license goes for anywhere from $375,000 to $450,000. So because it's a finite supply, it gets more expensive over time. And on a practical level versus, say, New York City, two guys can't start a neighborhood bar where people can just come in and have a drink and talk to each other and get a bite to eat. Because in order to do that, you know, they've got to come up with 110 if they want to do beer and wine, or 400 if they want to do alcohol. So it really excludes the smaller operators. It excludes the smaller operators. It also, over time, it sucks out these licenses from underserved neighborhoods, and it drags them into the South End and Back Bay and the Seaport. And so it's really anti-competitive. It's really bad for the restaurant industry in the city. It's really bad for neighborhoods. So that's one piece of it that I think Massachusetts in general, Boston in particular, really needs to think deeply about reworking those assets, because that's a crazy capitalization hurdle to try and cross. You want to do like like there's a bar in our neighborhood, the Bean. It's great. Everyone goes there. You could never do that bar now. I mean, and if we're not careful, it's a sea of Cheesecake Factories and Jerry Remy's and P.F. Chang's, because only big corporations will be able to afford those licenses. So I know Mayor Walsh has, again, with support from Ayana and Tito, has a new initiative to release more licenses in the market, which is great. I think part two of that problem is that for anyone who's built a restaurant, how do you guys feel about the permitting process? Oh my God, it's terrible. So, and it's arcane, and you really, you know, it's hard to get through, and you'll literally get, I'm just kidding, 1010, I love you. 1010 Mass Ave, I love you. But you go to the counter one day and you ask someone and it's one answer, and you go a week later and you've had the architect redo the plans and it's a different answer, and you go back 2 months later to get your stamp and they're like, oh, in the cafe, they were like, oh, you need another handicap bathroom. And, you know, that would have left us with 8 seats in the restaurant. Luckily, we had a good network of other restaurant people that helped us, but I think reworking the asset-based finite cap liquor license system is really important. I think streamlining and providing more resources to make the permitting process for building, health, fire more transparent and more achievable for people that aren't experienced operators. And then I also think you should have expanded small business loans that are targeted to help not only restaurants, but the other businesses that can become anchors for developing neighborhoods and communities get open. So we've been the beneficiary of what came before us, but I really think if the city wants underserved neighborhoods to develop, they've got to do something about the liquor licenses. They've got to make the permitting process more transparent and provide more support. And I know the economy's doing better now, but there's still plenty of underserved neighborhoods in Boston that they deserve cafes and they deserve coffee shops. And if you don't, because they're underserved right now, larger financial interests aren't going to move in there, and it's the people who live there that actually want to do those businesses. So you should facilitate lower threshold access to capital to develop those neighborhoods, and I think that's good for everyone. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you so much. We are at time, but I'm sure we're entering into a poster session and break. So if you'd like to talk with our panelists a little more and get your questions answered, that would be great.
But thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.